All right, good morning. We're back at our international lessons. We're still on the theme of Easter. We'll be there for this week and next week, and the week following we go to the book of Acts, and then we get ready for Pentecost. It's coming very quickly upon us. These are the 40 days following Easter, between the resurrection of Jesus and the day of Pentecost, that we will, as I say, be celebrating in a couple of weeks. Today we're in John chapter 21, where we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus. And we'll be there next week. We're in the first half of John chapter 21 this week, and next week we'll be in the part 2 of that. These are dealing with the resurrection appearances of Jesus. Now, up until now, all the resurrection appearances of Jesus, at least as the information we have them, took place in Judea, and particularly around the city of Jerusalem. That's where the women went to the tomb, found it empty, encountered the risen Christ as they were coming back. It's also where Jesus appeared to the disciples in the upper room and also to other disciples on the road to Emmaus. But today we're going to be up in Galilee, and that's way in the north again. It's about a week's journey from Jerusalem to Galilee, depending on how you go. It can be a little bit shorter if you go through Samaria, as Jesus did on occasions. Longer if you cross over the Jordan, go up through Perea, and then cross back over in Galilee to avoid being in Samaria and with the Samaritans. In any event, what we have here is Jesus as he's going up to, Jesus as he appears at the Sea of Tiberias, or Sea of Galilee, and his encounter with the disciples there. Now, what had happened was that Jesus had told the women, tell my disciples to go to Galilee and meet me on the mountain that I had told them I would come to. Now, we don't have an account of Jesus telling his disciples to come to a particular mountain after his resurrection. But there's a lot of things that we don't know that Jesus said that are also in the gospel accounts. In any event, they spent the first week in Jerusalem. We know that the women encountered Jesus, of course, at the tomb, and then that night Jesus appears to the disciples in the upper room and talks to them there. Of course, Thomas is not there, and he says, I don't believe this until I see his nail prints and put my hand in his side where the sword was, or the spear was. So a week later, Jesus appears in the upper room again to the disciples. Now, that's a week gone by. We have no knowledge of Jesus appearing to anybody other than those women and the disciples, except for Peter and of course the disciples on the road to Emmaus. Now, when they come back from Emmaus, they've started out on the journey, they're very confused, disappointed. When they realize that Jesus has been traveling with them, they hurry back to Jerusalem to share the news with the other disciples or the other believers. They're not part of the 12. We don't know the name of one, but we know the name of the other is Clopas. That's not listed among the 12. When they get back there, they tell them that we have seen Jesus, and the disciples say, yes, and he appeared to Peter as well. Now, Paul will mention that in 1 Corinthians 15, that he appeared to Peter. Paul will mention that he appears to James, that is the brother of Jesus, the author of our epistle of James, who became a leader of the church and was one of the first ones to be executed as a follower of Jesus. James, as his brother, had mocked Jesus, had not believed in him, had ridiculed him at times, but became a believer. Now, did that happen because Jesus appeared to him after the resurrection? We don't know. But Paul says he appeared to Jesus, or appeared to James, and he appeared to Cephas, and he also appeared to 500. Again, Paul doesn't tell us when that happened or even where it happened. So had it happened before they're going to Galilee, or did it happen in Galilee? Well, those are things that we don't know. But we'll talk about a little bit of that as we go along. Now, the disciples, at least 7 of them, have gone north. They haven't gone to a mountain. They've gone to the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee is, of course, a level area. There are mountains near it, but it's a level area. The home of Peter and Andrew and James and John is Bethsaida, which is on the north end of the Sea of Galilee on the Galilean side. So we kind of assume this may be where they went. How long did it take them to get there? Well, we could say it probably took a week. So now Jesus has been raised from the dead for 2 weeks. That's almost half of the time he's going to be on the earth before his ascension that we read about in Acts in 2 weeks. In any event, we don't know how long they've been there after they arrived before Peter says, I'm going fishing. Why would you go fishing? Jesus said, come and I'll meet you there. Well, probably Peter is bored. Probably he's taken a lot of ridicule from family, from neighbors, about, oh yes, you were the one that was going to follow the guy that was going to save the world, yes, What happened to him? Oh, and then there's stories about him rising from the dead, right, yes, yeah, sure, we're going to believe all of that stuff. So there's probably some ridicule going. Peter is probably getting to eat some crow out of this whole thing. So he says, I'm going fishing, which isn't all that bad if you get down to it. After all, he's got to eat. And I don't think Dad wants to just fund him back home for the fun of it. So he says, I'm going fishing. Well, there are 6 others there with him. Now, there are 11 disciples, but there are only 7 of them that are at the Sea of Galilee. There's Peter, there's James and John. They're not mentioned by name, but they're called the sons of Zebedee. There's Nathaniel, who's from Cana of Galilee, it mentions that. The other names, let me quickly glance at them so I can give them to you. Thomas, the doubter, is there. Simon Peter, Thomas the doubter, Nathaniel, Galilee, sons of Zebedee, and 2 others that are not named. We don't know who they are. Now, good chance that one of them might have been Andrew, because Andrew was a fisherman and the brother of Peter. Who's the other? Well, we don't know. Philip is sometimes thought to be the one because Andrew and Philip seem to have hung out together in many of the lists. They're listed together. But there's 4 that are not there, among them Matthew. And of course, Judas Iscariot is deceased. He's dead. But we don't have James, the son of Alphaeus. We don't have, Bartholomew may be another name for Nathaniel. We don't have Jude. We don't have Simon the Cyrene. So where are they? We don't know. They're just not mentioned. Peter says, I'm going fishing, and the others say, we'll go with you. Now, they're not fishermen necessarily, but they don't know what to do any more than Peter does. So they go fishing, and it's a bad night. They don't catch anything. I mean, not even a minnow. They catch nothing. And this is more crow for Peter to eat, and James and John, because they're fishermen. They're supposed to be the experts. Now, the question that comes to my mind is, if you caught a lot of fish, what are you going to do with them? You going to set up a market and sell them like you used to do? I mean, you can't eat a whole net of fish, and you can dry them and pickle them and salt them and do all that stuff to make them last, but you certainly aren't going to eat a full net of fish. Not 7 people aren't. So, what are you going to do with all these fish? Well, I don't think they ask the question any more than the women going to the tomb ask the question of, who's going to roll that stone aside for us? In grief and bewilderment, sometimes we don't ask some questions that other people would say, well, that didn't make sense that you didn't ask that. They didn't ask that question. They're going fishing. They don't catch anything. Well, on the land, there's a person there that looks like they're beside a fireplace there and cooking something for breakfast. And he calls out to them. Now, they don't recognize him. Maybe it's the early morning low light, or maybe it's just their expectations, like the men on the road to Emmaus did not expect Jesus to be along with them. These guys have not seen Jesus since they came north that we know of. So he calls out to them, and he kind of uses a bit of a word that probably stung a little bit. He says, children, have you caught no fish? And I can imagine Peterson, not knowing who it is. Who's that guy think he is? We're the experts, but we haven't caught any fish. No, we haven't caught any. Why? Well, throw the net on the other side. Yeah, right. If they aren't on this side, you think they're, but there's a little bit of a ring to that. You see, there was a long time ago when Jesus had first encountered Peter. Peter was a fisherman then, and he'd had a bad night. And Jesus said, let's cast out. After he talked to the people, he said, come on, Peter, let's cast out a little bit. And so he did, and Jesus said, throw the net in. And Peter said, look, I fished all night. Just throw it in. Okay. Big catch of fish that he brings back in. It's a little bit like that again this time. It's the morning, and throw the net in. Well, the nets are full, and they can't hold all the fish hardly. They're afraid of breaking them. And John, who's referred to as the beloved disciple, says, I think that guy's special on the shore. I think it's the Lord. Now, Peter, takes John's word at it, and he's been in his fishing outfit, which is not much clothes because you're sweating, you're working, you're getting wet and all that stuff. So he puts on a robe because it's only proper in Jewish culture to greet a person dressed properly, I guess we would say. So he puts on his robe and jumps into the water. Now, you think about that. He's leaving the other guys to bring in all these fish. This net's full. He's taken off. Peter is impetuous. He just does things on the spur of the moment without thinking about it, jumps in the water, takes off for the land, and gets there and realizes it's Jesus. Now, Jesus says, come on, Peter, let's have breakfast. And Peter looks on the fire, and there Jesus is cooking fish and baking bread. Oh my. Where has he remembered fish and bread? Well, in the resurrection appearances, on one occasion, Jesus asked for fish. On another, he asked for bread. But if we go back further in the scriptures to the feeding of the 5,000, he fed them with bread and fish, multiplied the amounts so that the whole crowd was able to eat. He's got a little bit of bread and fish on fire here for a few people, maybe just enough for himself. Well, the others are finally bringing in the boat with the net, and they get into land, and they kind of leave the net in the water so the fish aren't dying and stuff. And they come up, and they're standing there. I'm thinking people are having a rough time knowing what to say. Here's Jesus cooking, and says, come and eat, fellas. Come and eat. And then he goes and adds this word, and bring some of your fish. Now, a guy who can feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves and 2 fishes doesn't need anybody else's fish. But he's inviting them. He's not reprimanding them. He's not belittling them. He is inviting them to share in the feast. Here's impetuous Peter. Runs back to the boat, grabs some of the fish, and brings it up and says, here. Now, that's Peter. I didn't help bring it in, but I'll bring you some of the fish. And they eat. Now, I wonder what the conversation was. Boy, I don't suppose we ever caught as many fish as we caught tonight. I'll tell you, we did a great job out there, didn't we? Now, I don't imagine that was going on. I hauled in more than you did. You were kind of slack on the net there. I had to jump in and pull that net in while you were just standing in the boat. Now, I don't imagine that was going on either. I think some of them were saying, I don't understand what's happening here. And I don't think they talked about the weather. And I don't think they talked about the latest football game or any of that stuff. And probably not even politics. I think it probably was a pretty quiet meal as they maybe whispered back and forth to each other and what was going on. Yeah, it was. What are we to learn from this? One is, we don't have God in our pocket. We don't have God all figured out. God understands us much better than we understand ourselves or understand Him. And God is flexible. He had said to them, to the women, you go and tell the disciples to go to Galilee, to the mountain that I told them to go to. They didn't go. They stayed in the upper room, and John tells us that they stayed in the room with the doors locked because they were afraid. They didn't want to go out. Let the women go out and get food. We'll eat it when they bring it back. But we ain't going out ourselves because we'll get caught and we'll be in trouble. So they stayed there for a week. Jesus appeared to them in the upper room. Some of them went and said, I'm getting out of town, I'm going to Emmaus. I'm not going to Galilee, but I'm going to Emmaus, because they won't expect us to go to Emmaus. And so they go, and Jesus appears to them. See, Jesus has expectations of us, but he also has understanding of us. He calls us to be followers, but he realizes that sometimes we're going to falter, and we're going to fail him in terms of that. And he doesn't give up on us. He's the God of the second chance. He's the God who doesn't forget his goal and his purpose. And he still works with crackpots, as Paul calls us in Corinthians, the 4th chapter. We are clay vessels. We're not shiny brass things. We're just broken clay vessels, but he still will use us to accomplish his purposes. And yes, there may be times we eat crow. I hate crow, but it does nourish, and it strengthens us. But that's Jesus, the God who is flexible, the God who gives us a second chance. Now next week, we're going to encounter Peter continuing at this fireplace, and Jesus is going to talk to Peter directly. Going to ignore the other 6 to say something to Peter, but you can bet your life the other 6 are going to be listening very carefully, because they don't know when they're going to get the same question. And then the 4 that aren't there, I can't imagine what these disciples have got to tell them when they encounter them. Particularly if one of them is Matthew, and he's likely to be that, and Matthew thought he had things pretty well figured out. We don't have God figured out. That's why Paul writes in Ephesians and says, this is a mystery. Don't understand it. But God cares about each of us, and he doesn't give up. He keeps his plans going. All right, enough for that this week. Next week we encounter again the God who's flexible and who is so loving and forgiving. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this day that you've given to us. Thank you for this appearance that you made to your disciples, even when all of them weren't there, but you appeared to them, and you had a message of invitation. Come, eat, be strengthened, be nourished, and let's face the future together. And we thank you for that message in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, see you next week.